firmness must affirm the resolution through instrumental defense of establishing a domestic climate policy, including substantially increase restrictions.
American hypocrisy, oh let me count the ways. American democracy could treat you like a slave. The merriment democracy to senators for paying. Now they sending them to Washington to lock us in the cage. I rock a couple moccasins and modest in the way. They still pull up on blocks with flashing sirens in the chains. They rock you in your oculars and hoist you in the range. To top it off your hood but drinking poison in the rain. I ain't playing no, come to the city and take a sip. Where them killers is lurking in 12 blowing off hip. Murky waters is flooding and they ain't even scoop a sip. Scuba diving in the school zone, they tell us not to trip. Mr. President, I never seen the residents, but I hope you never think these residents are relevant. If the thoughts are popping in your head, we gon' be popping at your head until you're locking up with fear of all the elements. The yacht is steady rocking cause the cops are steady watching us. Looking through the oculus and sharks are steady popping up. Donald Trump is popular, the Twilight Zone is shocking us. Doctor got me popping drugs, but I'm steady stocking up. Know the voice is talking, but I kinda like the company. I mean, what have you done to me? I think I still make sense. How much is a vote worth? Think about 8 cents. Think you really hate sense, but that kinda makes sense. If I'm 3/5, that's the kind of thing that makes sense. If they selling people so they all could really make sense. If I'm thinking differently than most and it don't make sense. Guess it really served me all the good if I don't make sense. Make sense? I ain't talked to the doctor in 30 days, but I probably get locked up in 30 ways. I ain't talked to the doctor in 30 days, but he probably just got me on purple haze. I'm just saying.
Conquer 13, dominant way of knowing in the academy is that of empirical observation and critical analysis from a distance perspective. This is a view from above the object inquiry. This propositional knowledge is shadowed by another way of knowing that is grounded in hands-on, in participation and personal connection. This is a view from the ground level, in the thick of things. In contrast, the abstract and authoritative view from above, universal knowledge that pretends to transcend location. Subjective knowledges have been erased because they are illegible, eluding the force of inscription that would make them legible and thereby legitimate. What gets squeezed out by this epistemic violence is the whole realm of complex, finely nuanced meaning that is embodied and all the more meaningful because of its refusal to be spelled out. Meaning expressed through protective arts of disguise and secrecy. Subordinate people do not have the privilege of free and open debate on a level playing field the privileged classes take for granted.
Never thought I'd feel like I was fading. Too many people told me not to care. I start to think the hours I spent praying was just so I could run away from hell. Ain't never caught no bail, but I see that y'all been changing every cell. And your body's trying to make your people well. But homie, I could tell that you coming for us next. You right up on us. Eliminate us, then you get diplomas. Looking for a bonus. The architects are building up utopias and filling us with opiates and jail. Addicted to perfection, y'all just trying to live forever. I ain't think that all that hell could be stuffed inside a cell. Seem like every time that I click, gotta start it over. I've been studying the same line for days. I'm trying to make it perfect, hope you see the purpose, but my mind is perfect. I'm a prisoner to poetry and pain. I could see the symmetry in every single bar. I ain't never moving on unless I paint a perfect picture in a song. I'm trying to figure out if it's a curse or it's a blessing. Got these people stressing. Maybe I'ma see the Smith and Wesson soon. Boom. Take my head off, resurrect me. I'm a new man. You could thank the doctor next to me. Said he made the best of me, felt like a hysterectomy. But yesterday he said to me that I could be a masterpiece. After that he laughed and said the pastor took the demons out, leaving me to scream and shout. I think it took the meaning out my whole life in one night. Seen the patient next to me, she said they wanted her to give up on her baby Jeffrey. She said to me that they were saying Downs was a death sentence. Now they gave the death sentence to him. That just proved to me and you that there exists a future that'll got you. Told her you could pull up on the doctor and I got you. Water. We splashing the future future like water. The crew got us looking like martyrs. You know we gon' die for the causes, and some people dying to cause it. It's like an insatiable monster, but we gotta take it out of the closet. I picture the future, we running the world, and I don't think they're gonna stop it. Stop it. You know we gon' be alright. About to blacken up your night, but it sounded hella bright. Every place I go, I stand the mic up right there. May I educate you with the verse I write, yeah. You know I could cut the lies like a chainsaw. Everything I say raw, hoping that you meditate on choices for you take off. Aim hard, they been trying to flame y'all. Know they got a bunker for the day the world go flame on. Take off, it's destitute in my city. They been riding around in my whole hood and they say the place look gritty. Then they say that this the place they taking for their future bases. Face it, all this new technology is racist. Seen them taking places that we was relegated to. We renovated, then we innovated, and they raided through. Hated you, you thought all this money meant for aiding you. We still drinking iced tea, it's coming from the tap, while the government is clubbing with the money from our taxes. Hey, they even wanna change our history in taxes. Politicians flexing, posing for the camera. I just want some water in my cup, let's go get hammered. I've been drinking poison from these plants at IBM. It's ironic that my whole employment future lies with them. I've been saying to myself that my reality's a myth, that my future's in a whole other world. Think I'm convinced. Water. 2016 hanging over my head. I'm hoping 2020 hit before I'm hanging again. And hanging my friends, it's red and blue, they banging again. Could pop the trunk and pull the pistols out, we banging again. Hindsight is 2020, I'm picturing 2020 looking bleak, and I'm meek when I'm seeking and peaking. We plummeted 2020, seen about 10 to 20. Season McDonald cases, a couple of Donald races. That's filling up sending spaces in places we never been. Saying we can't race, we not fair. We wheelbarrows and wheel carriages, a wheel burden, the real burdens, the real progress. Congress never made progress. Sit on top of thousands of miles of them bodies. The body at a house carry thousands of liars. Try it, no more work, we whipping whitey. Tell the captain we don't care. It's 90-90, I'm tired of being tidy. Let's tie him up in a bow tie. Soul caliber, we cut him and zip him up. Take your chin and lift it up. Sure you can. Luke can crane, kick him, get his chest pushed in, finish him. We eloquently crafted colloquial speak so that they never hear the silence the colloquial speak. It's over your heads and under your feet. We let you win the first game, now accept your defeat. Many politicians, these policies that we debating. Why you hating? Can't you see the state is disintegrating? Even if we could change the world with a pen and paper and 2-hour debates on some EPA legislation ahead of the conversation. Purposefully debating with top minds at the head of the table and saying that climate change is a fable. Only vets and disabled, your health coverage is stable. They cut your support cables. So get yourself an antibiotic and ibuprofen and let them call you psychotic and prove a rock was a token. Don't let them make you a joke. I'm just opening up your spirit. Put your soul in the hope of us opening new beginnings. Get yourself an antibiotic and ibuprofen and let them call you psychotic and prove a rock was a token. Don't let them make you a joke. I'm just opening up your spirit. Put your soul in the hope of us opening new beginnings.
I guess the one you see, what's the end point of the, the method that you give? What do you think it does? Because, the card you read, the Square Go card, is talking about, dominant perceptions in terms of subjugated groups and how we can understand subjugation to transcend into some sort of movements.
Well, yeah, we're talking about specifically in the debate community where black disabled people are never talked about. The way that we engage is always that normative understanding of what is knowledge production, what's not knowledge production, and we're breaking that down with the fugitive practice of the 1AC, which is that inclusion of those voices that are marginalized.
Fugitivity is the inclusion of voices within something.
We say that a fugitive practice is one that disturbs the peace of debate, obviously, like the way that...
Fugitivity is disturbing whiteness.
What?
We think our argument about fugitivity, right, is when Jason is like places we've never been. It's the question of disrupting these spaces by forcing the presence
So
of
it's
black
like
disabled
seeking
bodies and then
inclusion
stealing
within
away.
segregated
No, it's not
spaces.
seeking inclusion.
Well,
It's
you just
about,
said
it's
you
about,
brought
it's
the
basically like
disabilities into
hijacking the
spaces where
conversations
they had
that are
not previously
normative.
been included.
That was
It's about
the-
hijacking the conversations that are normally had within
Hijacking
debate.
a normative conversation, and
Yeah, we're talking about how climate change affects black disabled people. We're talking about the discussion of how the discussions that are never had within climate change, i.e., like why is it that we experience these forms of violences within
yeah,
the
so
topic.
like white civil society definitely does not focus on the ways in which climate change affects black people. That's something we agree with.
Black disabled people.
Huh?
Black disabled people.
Okay, black disabled people specifically.
Yeah.
Okay, so the app uses. So I guess, yeah, I guess I'm curious of that. That's not what your card is in the context of. But anyways, I guess you talk about the ways in which we should translate subjugated groups through, I would say, some of the spits that you give, right? So talking about how much is a vote worth, 8 cents, selling people for cents.
What do you mean by
what is our government? What does it mean when we pay our money for taxes? You highlight like a bunch of exigencies of the app. A lot of them are located within like class and like representations in terms of finances, I guess, and then there are other portions where you're talking about like Black Death in terms of like criminality. I guess I'm curious what portion of the affirmative solves for said harms.
Yeah, it's not a question about like solving for those harms, i.e. like what we do here is not going to lead to some policy change that will actually resolve all of those things. But our conversations here are very important, and the way that we have disengaged with black disability.
To disrupt the space of debate.
Well, the way that we have disengaged with black disability within the context of debate is problematic. We need to talk about how black disabled people experience these sorts of violences too. We need to talk about how
sure. So I guess
how
like
do we
what
engage in the
stopped you from
conversation
giving a normative description that the government should do something to help black people with disabilities, given
because those
your
normative
extensive-
conversations are exclusionary of black disabled voices.
And you have now included yourself, so why not attach an app to it?
This is the point of the argument.
Actually, will you answer that real quick?
Yeah, sure. I think our conquer good evidence is actually really good on that, right? About the way that doing that, creating that normative.
Is everyone ready? Their use of historical instances of violence as evidence is a link their violence experienced by others to contingent upon participation in dominant social practices. Anti-blackness cannot be evidence through the historical events because blackness is a structural position constituted by outside of humanity, creating an objective, non-contingent relation to violence. So what if sin 11? subjective the vertical relationship violence that cannot be anti-objective because the life considered disorientation is structural as opposed to performative violence of black subjectivities and intersectional performative and structural violence that black is essentially being not a human being that human suffers continued violence black people some associated violence can prime not necessity just to perform the content political ontology radically for the political ontology of a sentient being but the black voice for the slaves is not continuing matter the conceptual framework of the suffering and their focus on performance reproduces anti-blackness their categories unavailable to the black body render derelict and marked as socially dead. Their focus on performativity substitute to sentiment for structural analysis, blocking the revolutionary potential of Wooderson 9. A statement that impact specific forms of society as the local resistance also often seduced by the overevaluation of performance art social political effectiveness and having the dealing the method of the cultural context of given performance speaker with assert a causal link between the performance and the emancipation of black people who are produced and consumed such as socials are typically honored by the mix of rhetorical and riches only and sentiments and substitution of the sentiments and analysts mystify the grammar that goes to Africa structural violence not analogous of the Asians working class European Latinos the artists and the class they want to know the civilized artists and things that demand is not only to follow the rationality, but is that to be imbued with rationality. Something else emerges is less than we think how Africans in the 20th century have altogether been different and rebound the ontology. We should note that even though Africa is now captured to the slave of the rest of the world, the relation to the rest of the world prohibition against taking differentiation to suffer knowledge of structural violence. Most black people in the world cry out to be appreciated and artists operate at the sense of compromising artistic technical compromising issues. No slavery, no diaspora, such gathering all the content, the shared sense of the violence. Is more performance-based ontology, such meaning takes place on the well-lit stage, but in a fog and their coalitional approach to race relations is focused on a shared experience of colonialization, racism, and scarcity, singularity of anti-blacks that focus on the white, non-white divide, number 13. Calling out the black story, this the pool of white names, mythical share moment, the Afro-pessimism seeks to illustrate the singularity, racial slavery, the globalized racial activity, making the blacks and non-blacks, a demand for interracial coalitions, disciplinary gesture against the black radicalism, refusal to admit the difference between structural position, born disparate histories between the black and non-black people of islands, singularity, racial slavery, and the experience, the specific African descendant, colonial ideology, the version of the white non-white model, the race has been called into the question of Afro-pessimism, racial hierarchy instructed by the black non-black divide, general person statuses, less obscures black suffering, engages the people of colorblindness, demonstrates that domestic racism, imperialism, and crime, and ultimately misses what is essential about the situation. Black does not represent the totality of racial formation, but does not relate to totality. And the ask call for greater visibility and fuller representation of people of color, trapped blackness, and
can you skip that card? Sorry.
Skip the Nyong'o card. Their hip-hop pedagogy and multicultural performance that obscures violence and anti-blackness through the structural suturing of capitalism and the structural antagonism of false liberal narrative of fugitivity reject their hip-hop methodology on reliance on performativity, Saucer and Woods 14. Hip-hop is that currently galvanized critical study to know how the anti-black world we find hip-hop is no more less compelling than the topic study of the pedagogy and the other moment of cultural product the black history. Hip-hop illuminates the cultural politics that continue to insist on the blackness of the black anti-black is in the hip-hop studies the anthem of relationship to black history, the end of reaching the reality into black history, ostensibly aimed to address it. Hip-hop does not have politics, cannot be read progressive, retrograde, simply analyzing the experience of content. More of hip-hop is production insofar as the services facilitate the focus on the contextual investigation that despite the diversity within the health of most of the hip-hop studies are integrated by the twofold problematic which are explored below. The first problem we addresses the overheads of the contextual racism as performance doing the personalized we find hip-hop is considered by education in the liberatory kind of hip-hop culture according to offers the way out of the alienation racism and global capitalism. The perception problem is that in the history of anti-black sexual violence has to hip-hop is a matter of economic exploitation, racial prejudice, the hip-hop privilege role, the economic restructuring post-civil rights period, the reinvigoration of the racial nameless intended this change of these things of arguing the war within black community and freedom and the struggle across the parts of the millennium intellectual and these analog areas in hip-hop are the dimension of the black studies and archival would regard as such pitfalls, right? But a lack of solidarity in the black revolution under transcendent black white binary multiculturalism is affecting until nothing less than our rejected black as a central organization with socially the containment the black politics and condition of international multicultural second hip-hop studies produce a liberal multicultural university not the black show produced by the radical conception of black cities but hip-hop itself did hip-hop is the insisting of forging and crossing which is imaginary community is by extension the tendency is also a separate scholarship but hip-hop is also employing multicultural paradigm hip-hop is considered a recapture of the black when undermines the very daily black studies rather structural assault on the anti-black and highlighting diverse programs and race systems and radical universalism and system and ethical confrontation with suffering and their black is refusal of victimization and The link outweighs the dissent to the alternative. Anti-blackness makes resolving the violence against other people of color impossible. Reproducing middle class society means resolving all these prerequisite to their offense by siege Spain 14. Intended to defend the rights and liberties of the last victim of silence to face the black political targets of the monopoly of the police party back on board the greatest alliance of the anti-black civil society for the capitalization of the benefit of the state's power, the highlighting how anti-black condition of political for the U.S. and social movements of the non-black people invited comprising seeking the redress and the political system has been helping on the structure of black life, the influence of civil society, accommodating civil society should be part of the close instead of abandon endless and including slave and waiting to supplement anti-black function in the hand-in-hand system, systematic parasite balance, the black people targeted the crowding of the black games, the black games, the structure of the tactics of actively terrorizing people who are wings of the same thing and different because blackness and criminality only right in the U.S. lexicon. The women rights are seen in the Constitution. They are not the criminal, but they are articulated, but they are not the black end. Do you want to read Cleo? The belief that the state can mediate climate policy is a violent, cruel optimism perpetuates black suffering, radical restructuring of society or else environmental justice movement like the African inevitably fell. Pluto 16. Through the reliance of the Asian Muslim itself, the local state will considerably to actors, nothing in unprobable communities are essential function, the racial capitalism, the radical racial capitalism, the race structuring logic, differential value, harness capital exploitation, these differences, the recognizing develop, presumption of political things that important is the purpose of the radical racial surplus is other possible belief that the state the activists believe the state can actually protect them. They're hoping that the activists can see it as the only option that cannot be identified pass outside the framework offered by the state to recall the conception of the CRM and the EG as the liberal model human and capitalism, racial domination, are challenging the state's efforts to protect the neoliberal era. The state's not about eliminating the state seems to the fear of the capital flag, the conservative state to live up to the EJ service, but there's not a little change to material pollution with things because the EJ moves the fundamental rethinking attitudes towards the state instead of the party in the state of adversaries and directly challenge the EJ can regain radical position by challenging the state, refusing to participate in regulation rates, not about being respectable, including by raising help of polluters. Our EJ is about to give into a planetary crisis, which we need to radicalize the EJ more than ever. And our alternative is directed affirmative in order to focus on compromising paradigm analysis that calls for the end of America wellness intent. I begin to see how uncompromising paradigm analysis is complete overthrow the essential order and neoliberal compromises a radical element across hard movement made from reduce our inability and willingness to moderate the hold the feet of political fire on uncompromising paradigm analysis. We are allowed to be displaced in pragmatic consideration. Black women are still captive, trapped within the black institutional amount of liberal discourse of bodies that subject choice yet freedom from focusing on unproductive vital fetches of black females only starting for politics are announced a captive black question cut through the social media study on the heart of the modern racial sexualized violence spillers 87. The new world is a human extinct with the void on blood represents African peoples and since the actual mutilation discriminate found the black market process of body will be violent the severing of the captive body in the motive well the captive body becomes a resource that uses sensuality every time the sending contradicts the captive body reduces things to captive sexuality provides physical biological aspiration as it embodies the sheer power of powerlessness that's like it's more general powerlessness resonating throughout the body the very center of the human social media before the body there is a flesh of 0 degrees of social composition the skeptic system of the versus score there flesh constructs the ethnicity contemporary critical discourse and neither add knowledge or discourse take away the African female subject sense of these conditions only the targets of rape but also the topic of specific internalized torture prostitution the materialized seems the unprotected female flesh ungendered offering practices theory next to living or further and the captive body brings it to the focus on social realities and the muscle metaphors are thoroughly involved in their literal theory and business and exchange between them and virtually even if the captive body fails to be liberated really interests me are release the dynamics naming of these dynamic naming. Yeah.
Alright.
It's a Bartlett dynamic naming, by the way.
Y'all ready for cross section?
Yeah.
What is vertigo? Dysphoria. Okay. Yeah, so why did y'all choose to change the language of Wilderson when he says unflinching paradigmatic analysis?
Because I've had that debate since I was 19. I think unflinching means resolve, but I know that you talk about it in one of your debates, and I wanted to talk about the content of the conversation rather than
so you don't think it's
rhetoric.
so you don't think it's important then in other debates and like as you disclose before this round that you say the word unflinching, you think that's just a distraction to the debate that we're gonna have?
What do you mean?
Kind of, like you literally just said you want to talk about the content instead of the language you use.
You asked what alt I go for. I go for paradigmatic analysis. If
what's
your links before the debate were predicated off of the notion of me using unflinching,
right,
I would defend the rhetoric. I just think that it's important in debates to be conscious of the people that you're debating because most people actually think that it means that people socially cannot engage in a debate because of the ways in which a certain word mediates a space. I think that's
what are people of color blindness?
But I'll defend the word also.
What are people of color blindness?
Unflinching means resolved.
What are people of color blindness?
It means a lack of perception to the way that blackness operates. So it assumes a false multiculturalism is what the card says.
All right.
It means
So one, how are we
to have a
multiculturalism?
perception of, you know.
How are we multiculturalism?
Right, the Saucer in Wood 14 card is specifically talking about how hip hop is used in this like I guess like prop up of capitalism in a way that it uses hip hop as a way to like I guess like be advertisable. I don't know if that's like the
Wait, no. I was asking how we're
understanding,
multiculturalism.
Right, so hip hop is considered a multicultural effect.
So because other people use hip hop and multiculturalism,
well,
that means that
it's seen as like a way, like, look, we're diverse. Look, we're diverse. Ha ha ha. Hip hop, use hip hop to talk about environmental justice.
Yeah, I just don't know where in the AF we said that we were diverse. We were talking about black disabled people.
No, you're not though. Actually, your evidence is specifically talking about one subject.
What about the
spits? The spits you read actually talk about lack of specificity of color. You say the new technology of racism. You say politicians are posing for the camera. Me and my friends. I don't know why I should assume that each of these lines are about them. You talk about. I do think that you talk about T.C. McDonald, which I will discuss in my 2NC, and I think that you specify a couple certain names that I think will specify links.
Okay.
Contingent.
How are we hip hop pedagogy?
One.
Because we spit. We hip hop pedagogy.
No, because of what your spits say about the
What
ways in
does
which
the spit
we
say
can
hip hop
use.
pedagogy?
Yeah, it says that we should use our speak in order to leverage.
Yeah, what
themes,
does
that we should
colloquial
not
speak have to do
conversations
with
about
hip hop?
If you need me to read the tenets of hip hop studies, I will do that. But in order to have a solvency mechanism for the affirmative, we think that the app is tied to.
I mean,
a couple
you're not
of
talking
thoughts.
about your card is not talking about fugitivity.
I agree that you have race to defend the least, and so I will agree to you with that. I will tell you that I will read some parts of your evidence.
First of all, you gotta listen to the spits of the app if you're gonna like talk.
I think I've referenced like 30 things you've said. I think it's kind of fucked up just to say that since I didn't read another spit that I haven't answered the shit that you've said.
Starting. Black disabled bodies are not part of the topic. The resolution presumes white able-bodied subjectivity and doesn't speak on the experience of black disabled bodies in and outside these spaces. Hurricane Katrina and Sandy prove this. Wet climate disasters only matter when they hurt what able-bodied people. We force presence of black disability that allows the resistance of psychological violence, of having no value in a place to belong, and challenges the notion that black disabled bodies are sites of death and not life. When Jason says murky waters is flooding and they even scuba diving in a school zone, they tell us not to trip. He's talking about what's like like to be in the middle of a climate disaster and being ignored. We challenge the idea that black disabled people have nowhere to belong, that their existence is a mistake. That's when we see horrors like she said to me that they were saying down to the death sentence. Now they gave the death sentence to them. This is proof to you and me that there exists a future that don't got you. This logic of Western value is what causes black and disabled people to be left behind when the storm comes. And after the storm hits, they realize they weren't meant to survive. The half of first black disabled body has already perfect to create a space of self-love and feeling and create a communal mindset of shit that can break down the ways that black disabled bodies are sacrificed when the storm comes down to. Now, once again, our first argument is going to be a psychological violence DA there, understanding of being uncompromising is problematic for the black disabled body because they imagine a utopic kind of world where the black disabled body does not need to engage in certain compromising actions to survive. They basically tell black disabled people to shut up and deal with their psychological violence, which means they cause, which means they reify the impact they have and can't solve. It means we're better for black disabled people. Brace 14. If I don't take my medication, I die. It's basic for me. There's no alternative. Why take no magic or anything else that may very well work for you. As I have a problem with the fact that I have to rely on the state, which I despise. It literally ever fired my being for basic substance, including these medication and destruction of the state that I dream of actually having. People like me will die quicker than some others. I'm actually not okay being left behind because my body not okay with me. Many of us being left behind because our bodies and circumstances we find ourselves not in some future free state, free oppression, free existence, and not now the one thing we have any measure of control over is now. So don't leave us fucking up. Build a culture of very safe folks are not left behind. This is basic as death. Like literally, this is gonna be a victim blaming DA to any time that they say that the 1AC was bad for investing in the future, because our argument is that is a survival strategy to literally avoid psychological violence that leads us to perfectionism. DA, they turn Jason into a black super crypt that forced the logic of Western productivity on him. Our argument is that Jason 1AC was enough, and you arguing that he must break down all that black civil society is violent in so much it holds him accountable for any blackness in the world. They're putting the entire world on Jason's shoulders and asking him to deal with it. That causes psychological violence. We're criticizing the reason why you prefer the affirmative. Also, they create the false choice. I think this is a direct link to all of their hip-hop arguments, because they turn the noise of 1AC into an understandable form of music that they can contest. They create the false choice where they give you the subjectivity to say no, to reject Jason for not being enough. We say reject the ability, reject the agency that they're giving you to say no. Havelstrom 13. When we refuse, we allow dissonance to continue. When we enter a classroom, we refuse to call the order. We are allowing dissonance, disorganized study, but study that precedes our call. When we listen to music, we refuse the idea that music happens only when the musician enters and picks up an instrument. We refuse to call the order. A teacher picking up the book. We refuse the order of distinction between noise and music, chatter and knowledge, pain and truth, moan and harmony. Tell us to listen to the noise we make and refuse the offer. We receive to shape that noise into music, which means even if they win, we don't do anything or we don't solve. Our argument is good because that breaks down the notion of productivity that allow you to shape the noise into, that allows you to shape noise in music. And also, as a black disabled scholarship, DA not only understand black disability simultaneously account for the black disabled body. This wouldn't be an answer to all of their multiculturalism argument. One, we are not multiculturalism. We're specifically talking about blackness. Even if we do in the context of black and disability, this is good because their theory of not discussing disability makes it impossible for black disabled subjects to engage in their kind of activism. There's also a bit of double bind here. Even YC was black disability, which means they recognize the need for scholarship, and you can just vote out for. There's an ableism link to the 1NC Stewart 92. I reject notion that black disabled people experience kind of double oppression. I said that racism within disability is a part of a process of simultaneous oppression with black people experience daily. Society is also experienced with disabled people from the black people by peers as nothing minority communities and disabled people. Intolerance puts this group to a margin of society is necessary to construct a distinct black disabled identity. It also helps us to obtain a better understanding of the construct of particular identity, which represents the center of the society and the margin to exclusion, not demanding a special place for black disabled people. A notion hierarchical oppressing experience black disabled people will add to a greater insight into its wide practice. I've identified 3 areas where I get their black disabled people experience a distinct form of oppression limited to individuality and identity. Secondly, resource discrimination following isolation. When in a community and family, black disabled people are rendered invisible and have no social or image. Unlike white disabled people, black disabled people are not fully incorporated into society. Instead, they are continually judged as outside or alien to society. at a range of levels. That's a diss-ad to their homogenization of blackness. Our argument is within their theory. They create the social death for a black disabled body because they have no image within Wilderson's theory, no understanding of how the black disabled body experience oppression. I think this is uniquely true in the context of the gross amount of ableist language that is in the 1NC when they use things like color or blindness as a metaphor or vertigo as a metaphor, or willing to say unflinching before the round but don't want to have the debate because they know they're fucking gonna lose it, is a reason in that they is a reason that their theory is never going to be accessible for black disabled bodies. Some people fucking flinch because they're abuse victims, and when they are given modes of affection they flinch because they think they're about to get hurt. That form of criminalization. Look at fucking Wilderson's writing. Wilderson is riddled with this term unflinching, which even means if they got rid of it to avoid a tactical debate, it's still within their theory, and their theory will never be able to understand the black disabled subjects, which is reason you reject them. Now answer their futurity performance arguments. Afrofuturism results and links to decay. We create positions of social life within social death by creating the new spaces where black bodies can't actually exist, which breaks down the social death that Wilderson criticized. Keith 16. The work of Afrofuturist creators often involves critiquing, interrogating, seeking simultaneous solution of black bodies and modern possibility around the development of post-war Afrofuturism to the black masculine superhero figure created by the iconic artist Jack Kirby. Black Kirby is our exhibit and body think piece carried out by taking Jack Kirby's iconic mainstream superheroes and reimagining them through black cultural lenses. They create an artistic space in which black life can be fantastical and abstract outside the context of whiteness, rendering black body were grounded in familiar flame, which Jack Kirby turned a black superhero a body into a site of restoration, resistance, and post-colonial reimagination that fears like time travel, reincarnation, immortality, and parallel universe allow to supersede the limitation of history, while restoring power to narrative and the rear by reclaiming time and controlling its flow and direction. Black creators refute colonial notions of black people outside history and linear progress, creating timelines with their own rules and narratives. The imagination is the only hope for survival or based around endless and immortality, bypassing permanence of death and stretching time beyond our universe's rule. This is exactly the way that the 1AC is able to burn down society by breaking out of the white spaces that constantly determine logic and create blackness is the new form of life that breaks down what possibility that means permutation, do both, also permutation, and affirm the act as of that uncompromising position towards civil society. I think this also links to our perfection DA, the way that is problematic to tell Jason, and the way he's going about resisting society is that this our link argument they have is his history, using historical instances of violence. They don't have a specific link to this, but even if they do, it's going to link back to them because all of Wilderson's understanding also has to go back to history. I think that's inevitable. Also, our ableism, black disability link probably takes that out because all of this is just a theory of power. Our understanding of disability and blackness complicates and disproves that theory of power, which means there's no link. They read this Billard evidence about the black male body. They ignore the parts of Barnes or Jason specifically talking about how the agency of the black woman is taken away when her child had Down syndrome, and that baby is destroyed, and her agency, control over her own body is destroyed. It's a reason why, there's no link to this argument. If they're like, oh, you didn't talk about it enough, that's probably, again, a link to our perfectionism argument. Ultimately, even if they win, some risk to link the permutation resolve, and they're never going to be able to resolve the psychological violence that's done by the performance of 1AC, and them telling Jason that the 1AC wasn't good enough. What's a disability?
Yes.
Sure. We will understand two levels of what we would call disability. First is the level of impairment, which is a mental, physical, emotional, material thing that is debilitating within society, i.e. is something that changes the way you engage in material structures, i.e. being deaf, being blind, etc. Disability is the social connotation and social valuing of that, i.e. certain abilities, certain impairments are labeled disability based on societal norms. So disability is ultimately the value judgment of impairment and ability.
Okay, cool, sure. So you say that that the negative was some kind of utopian way of thinking of engaging with black people who are disabled, right? So I guess what part of the alternative, excludes black disabled people?
Our argument is when you're
so black disabled people have to
Sure, so if you win that Jason's performance, which is an act of self-love and trying to resolve psychological violence, is a compromising form of engagement with civil society.
Why is that Jason's ability to have something like self-love or have psychological violence contingent upon bringing people with disabilities in the conversation of normative, like, legal debates?
Sure, I think our argument, right, is question of social. I think our key evidence
If it's just a question
sure.
of self-love.
No, yeah, I can answer this question.
Okay, cool.
Sure. So our key evidence, right, is really good about it. It's the question of creating social imaginations. The idea of seeing black disabled people, imagining black disabled people surviving the climate disaster, imagining spaces where they belong in debate, is key to not think that life is hopeless and not think that you're just a worthless piece of garbage.
Like,
what?
Why is that positive? Why should we imagine black people with disabilities in
Our
spaces
argument
that
is
are
it's
ultimately inaccessible?
Our argument is that it is a survival strategy in the context of the
How
way
is that surviving?
because of the way that Jason Blood.
If we know that a structure is fundamentally anti-black, why is it positive to imagine that it's positive?
Sure, because
should we imagine black men outside of prison?
Should we imagine
should we imagine a world that doesn't hyper-criminalize black men?
Yes.
I think our Keeves evidence is really
Cool.
good on
I
how
guess
that
how do we
breaks
go about
down white's
achieving
control
said
of
thing?
life. What?
How do we go about achieving said thing?
How do we go about like the breaking down of or like the
to
imagination?
get black men out of prison. How does the imagining them out of it actually get them out?
Sure, I think our Keeves evidence is good on how we imagine it, but two, our argument is that creates a different way of thinking, i.e. the way that you're able to say you didn't say unflinching in this debate because you've been debating for a while and people have told you that's bad. Same way that Georgetown takes rhetoric like crazy and other things out of their arguments because they're engaging with us is the way that we change the way people think because we're literally reading this argument. Us being here and reading this app has changed the NDT already.
To debate you on an annoying thing means that you've changed the debate community.
An annoying thing? A fucking annoying thing? Is that really what you're going to say to me, Q?
It is because I've been debating.
Why is it annoying?
Then why don't you just change if you don't want the argument, stop fucking saying the word. Or stop reading the card.
You just told me that doing that means that you have changed the debate community. I'm confused. Okay.
Bro, you not debating?
Yeah,
Yo, what you doing? Why?
Oh, okay, damn.
Okay. Everyone good?
What's the order?
It'll be the critique. The permutations will be in the luminaries.
Q, are there cards?
Nope.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Civil society is producing given steps of a process, accumulation, exchange of black bodies. The slave trade represents a moment of pure gratuitous violence. Black bodies reduced to flesh, reduce black bodies to flesh, ontologically alienated from Afro-Caribbean by destruction. Many familial lineage, cultural ties beyond pure relationship, ownership of the master. The black woman represents a hinge point of the system of anti-blackness, reduced to disposable factor production of slave children, artery reduced to her flesh, accumulated by slave master, removed from any familial relation, ontologically alienated from any historical lineage. The availability of black women to be raped and forced reproduction ensures the continuation of anti-black violence, paradoxically reproducing black life is simultaneously seeking its erasure. This process of slavery is not ended. Civil society continues to remain parasitic upon blackness as derelict in order to render itself coherent, relying on black as a negative standard which confirm everyone else's identity, contrast, and coherence in non-black bodies. And civil society can only maintain through forever distinguishing subjectivity from blackness. Non-blacks maintain their sense of identity by clarifying themselves as not dangerous, not criminal, not deviant. These discourses only refine and remain parasitic on the black body as a derelict container for dangerous deviance, criminality, continuing the fungibility of blackness as a negative standard for identity. This is proven by the immense amounts of tweezy links to the rhetoric and the criminality, by the supercharged idea that he has the right to tell us that we don't have the right to correct Jason in one, hyper-masculine views, and two, the notion that we cannot ask for that within a context of revolutionary politics, that when we make links that we're assuming a level of perfection presumes that, one, black men don't need to be checked on hypermasculinity, or two, that we can't have conversations within communities about the ways in which they say that different identities are oppressed on a specter, which is our argument about the ways in which blackness becomes criminalized as a token rather than as an understanding of blackness through a position analogous to other people. That's not saying you can't understand other violence. It's saying when you make it a trope to extend to other bodies and use it as a way to, criminalize or tokenize the conversation rather than engage with the structure and claim about the way that blackness is disability. That link will make actually more sense in a second, so I should have just waited. Anyways. Their description is ability as a genre or territory ignores what gives weight and force to the territory, which is structuring position between blackness and anti-blackness. Their description of identity as performance ignores that blackness is not identity, but a condition, a modality for dereliction given material vitality by racial schema that marks black skin as equivalent to ontological nothingness, which is a reason why in their links it becomes particularly awkward when they talk about something like unflinching, which is a term that Hartman coins in relationship to Harriet Tubman, or the ways in which she had epilepsy but could not be recognized, but that her epilepsy couldn't be recognized because of her blackness, which is our argument about the way that blackness overdetermines identity. Argument is not that we don't experience different relationships. Obviously, a black poor person it interprets the world in a different way than a black rich person. Our argument is that blackness overdetermines and structures those relationships, which means that they're talking about the contingent form of violence, which sees blackness in the world, rather than an understanding of an antagonism which sees blackness outside of the world. The problem with that is that, one, it assumes, it mediates certain things predicated off of norms, so it attempts to break norms rather than escape the norms that disallow for freedom in the first place, which is our argument about how they can create change but not freedom. Because it's possible, for example, for someone with disabilities, white people fear having a disability. White people don't ever fear being black, which means that the compromising position that they put black people with disabilities in only exists because they seek to repudiate norms rather than do shit like just black communities learn how to take care of black communities, which is our argument about the ways in which the AF appeals to, which certain spits of the AF appeal to things like legislation, or the ways in which people are marked as criminal while ignoring the structuring things that give weight to those foundations, which is our other argument. Okay, cool. I'm going to clarify something because it'll be kind of confusing. Our links are going to be both on the level of the ontic and the ontological. We're making ontic links about, which is like shit like the Polito evidence, or the ways in which criminal, climate action refuses to mediate upon black lives because, state solutions fail. Every time an EJ movement goes to the state, literally 0.3% of those environmental laws become regulated, which is an argument they conceded about the ways in which black people are then forced to invest political hope and engagement into structures that do not literally refuse the ability to change the way that black people are interpolated by law. And two, the F doesn't solve anything, which is the whole portion at the top where he's talking about the ways in which Jason is marked and the ways in which black people with disabilities were ignored in Katrina. It's not something that we should force ourselves to imagine because that institution is structurally incapable of responding to the crises that the AF has said are bad, which one is a reason why you should vote negative on presumption, and two is a reason why their false hope into existing institutions is should be enough of a reason to vote negative on the ontological question, which is our argument about how ontological structures hit ontic structures is because, through a structural analysis, we can see the desires of the affirmative were already pre-mediated by an ontological structure that gives vitality to those ontic things, such as the refusal for people to care about Hurricane Katrina or to help people materially. That ignores the fact that, Hurricane Katrina, we saw images of black women and black children starving, or we saw images of black people poor, but also saw living in poverty and unable to respond to the crises, while simultaneously saw images of them looting, which is our argument about the ways in which media representation is mediated to ignore black existence in the first place, right? That attempting to repudiate or mediate those images restructures blackness in the space of inaccessibility. They say different strategies for different people. Our argument is that the material strategies that the AF assumes, ignores, or gives weight to the libidinal and linguistic economies that circulate those things in the first place. For example, if I want to materially have something, but I have to levy a claim against the state, it ignores that our bodies have to be laid to objection in order to make said desires. The alternative doesn't criminalize people who go to the state and ask for money. Our argument is that it's not a good methodology, one, because the state is incapable of responding to said crises, and two, creates a notion of reparation or reconciliation within governmental structures that's impossible, and three, you didn't say at some point survival must happen. Survival is imminent, right? People survive. That's the fucking nature of the world. Our argument is that the AF doesn't provide any material thing. It just says that the possibility of material things could be a good thing, which is not a reason to vote affirmative. They have conceded, I guess I'll answer the rhetoric links here, which is our initial argument about the ways in which, on the last argument really quickly. Picard is also talking about welfare and the ways in which people engage in said things. Our argument to situate it in this example would be that something like the welfare queen becomes becomes criminalized and extended to other bodies through a necessary form of welfare, right? Because of the ways in which slavery created positions for black people and in certain communities, and then they're criminalized for it, which is our argument about the ways in which the app is taken in, materialized, and then criminalized for the said things that they desire in the first place, which is the reason why performance is bad, because you don't control the audience in which the performance is situated into. That Wood's evidence isn't just like hip-hop bad. It's saying that when you situate those things in terms of anti-capitalism, which is the portions of the spit that I'm pulling out in When I See Cross-Ex about the how much we get paid for cents and the ways in which the EPA ignores things in order for profit-based motives, ignores the fact that the EPA is fundamentally sutured by anti-black institutions, and that they give vitality to those things through representing those things as only being mediated by profit concerns or capitalism, which ignores the reduction to flesh, which is our argument about, you know, the ways in which structuring things structure other things. Okay. The next portion of the debate is the colorblindness vertigo portion of the debate. Our argument about colorblindness is that there's a lack of perception of the ways in which slavery has translated into existing institutions. That does not require a bodily vision of sight. It's rather like, right, that's like Dave Chappelle's skit about the ways in which people who do not have, who are medically defined as blind, still engaging in anti-blackness because of the ability to see color without race. Does that make sense? I mean, to see race without color. Sorry, that was a bad explanation. But anyways, the ways in which we explain those things as perceptional rather than just merely vision proves our argument about the desire to criminalize blackness or the desire to latch onto rhetoric as a means of not community building, right? Which is like, why the fuck, if you knew you liked to go for this argument, would you not say before the debate, hey, that makes me uncomfortable, would you please change that? But rather, it's used as a referendum for a ballot, which is exactly the debate that I wanted to avoid, because I think that unflinching means unwavering. But if it's going to hurt, like, if a word that I say is going to affect someone else, then I'm obviously going to change it if it simply is, you know, a synonym for another word.
Right. You right?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I guess my first question is, like, you make this argument about the perfection argument being bad because then black men can't be checked for, like, hypermasculinity. Like, I guess.
Yeah, I think, like, it's a bad explanation of Rutgers' argument. I think that when Nicole is talking about the superwoman trope and the ways in which black women are perceived as productive sources of labor, assumes that you ever came to terms with the fact that labor is then ripped from flesh. So I'm not asking you to do more labor. I'm saying to be recognized, to recognize your own flesh.
My question then is, why does that then not say why, like, you should be held accountable for, like, ableist metaphors and rhetoric? Like, why, I guess, like, when you were saying
we made a structuring claim about the ways in which black women and black female flesh is used to mediate all other social problems. So okay.
How does that, like, mediate, like, the black disabled woman's experience, I guess? Like, or how does that change the addition of disability?
Spillers is literally talking about the mutilation of the body being separated from the flesh. Her argument is that social understandings, norms in which you've established as the problem were only created and mediated after a prior reduction of flesh, right? So when you say a norm, it's not that blackness is non-normative. It's blackness is the thing that gives norms themselves meaning, right? And so we think that the app attempts to mediate that distinction between normative and non-normative rather than beginning at flesh.
What makes us, like, a lot of your links seem to be coming from the idea that we are investing the hope in the political. What makes us, like, environmental justice, we should change political systems?
No, I'm making a two-layered statement.
Sure.
Either one, that the app is purely a means of mediating something like debate, which is a reason why you can vote negative on presumption, because the harms that the app talks about are not resolved by the affirmative.
Why does the app have to resolve anything?
What do you mean? Because it's debate.
Sure.
We've given, like, the app has a burden of proof, the neg has a burden of rejoinder.
Okay.
You have not contested said claim.
My next question is, you say, like, instead of, like, having hope in, like, legislation, we should, like, focus on black communities. I guess I have two questions here. One, how does the alternative, like, an investment in black communities? And two, like, how do those black communities resolve, like, our Stewart evidence that talks about how black disabled people don't get access?
We think that we're taking the app offense, which is talking about things like fugitivity, and actually doing that. So what we would say is that an unflinching paradigmatic analysis or an uncompromising paradigmatic analysis would allow us to remove to remove all affective hope or faith within existing institutions, which
What?
would allow for black people to do what you said is important, which is like black social life and black
Sure,
social
you say
death.
you don't.
We
You
agree.
say you don't
The only way to do that
criminalize
is to
people
stop
for. You say you
placing
don't
faith in
criminalize
existing
people for having
institutions.
bad strategies. That's one of your claims about like our about our.
Doesn't mean they win.
evidence.
Like, winners
yeah, but
win,
like,
losers
why
lose.
should we? Why should we lose then if you're not going to criminalize us for having that bad strategy?
There's not a question of criminalize and win and lose. Like, this is a
Okay.
game. I've won the game. Our argument is not that we criminalize you.
Sure,
It's rather that we have
what does it mean
provided
to
a
be
better
parasitic?
methodology and that your methodology
What
leads
does
to
it
bad
mean to be
shit.
parasitic?
Huh?
What does it mean parasitic?
Parasitic, it means to occupy or to consume something like a living organism that can occupy, for example, a bacteria that lives off of another thing without contributing, which is what we think white people do.
Cool.
Alright, there's one part I'm not thinking about. Oh,
Self-care. Okay. Hold on.
Were y'all taking prep?
Mm-hmm.
Doing it right now.
script do you have?
536.
I sent the cards out. Just starting off for the 2 and C left off, and then there's perm case after that.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Everyone get? All of their links are situated in a grammar. They have conceded the grammar of discourse is not liberatory for black people. That's a terrible argument. First, it's the policies of blackness via identity politics like disability. They are already assuming we are already assuming blackness as criminal. The word means different things in different contexts. Using disability studies as an academic to please black thought is super fucked up. Now the second is unflinching. Unflinching needs to be resolved and unwavering. It does not mean bodily flinches. And considering Spillers and Wooderson agree that black people are not capable of having bodily integration does not possess integrity does not possess the body, but it doesn't exist in the flesh. Now, vertigo specifically is about black people who lack a form of orientation in the world, and they lack rationality. Blackness is what
Relationality.
Yeah, relationality. I'm sorry. Relationality is what gives way to the norms of that define the ability or lack thereof. Now, it's not a term coined from bodily orientation or what might be thought of that is a cognitive disability. And second is color blindness doesn't have to do with visual or related to bodily configuration. Yeah. If we win that the affirmative is a bad method to liberate from anti-blackness, you should vote to engage in uncompromising paradigm analysis. The affirmative sounds like, well, there might be trapped in the system of anti-blackness, but at least we can create hope for us. This act has transformed itself into nothing more than liberal reformism. The uncompromising that Wooderson describes is the act projecting of hope and survival. At the worst, it's the worst kind of pessimism because they have abandoned themselves to the institutional formation, the status, simply contenting themselves with reversing them. This makes the permutation impossible. Only alternative radical pessimism about existing situations in the world writ large to maintain the optimistic hope and revolutionary transformation for possibility. And optimism and pessimism maintains that optimism is a hope and revolution transformation. And voting negative means that you align yourself with our affect producing pessimistic relationship to the world as the institutions. Their inherent anti-blackness is only affect capable of producing a drive for revolutionary capacity and politics. Now, permutation pop up. They don't get, even if we don't go for the alternative, they don't get permutations. We have dissets to the we have dissets to the act. One, we should be able to hold their athletes to a standard which we can test them and test them. This is why all their tweets see dissets is bullshit. We aren't victim blaming or telling them they have to be perfect. It's just they just don't get a perm in a method debate. They haven't given a reason why they get to moot all of net offense in the sake of victim blaming or we're not perfect. And the second, we have a structuring criticism of the app. They haven't explained a lot of stuff, and that means that they don't get to sidestep the question of the negative and just say permutation. Now the second is that you should theorize in 1AC is an intellectual artifact that since they don't defend the USFG or don't have to defend direct action implemented by the USFG, they will always shift to the app saying we already did this, we already took it into consideration of what the neg is saying. They mean that they can abandon arguments without being having to force to engage those specific arguments and they defend that implications of the 1AC. Now this means the app doesn't get a permutation because the perm blocks engagement with the 1AC. Now, if they win the permutation, it's because it's severance, and that's bad. That's bad because it creates a moving target. Now, specifically, I'll answer both perms here. First perm do both specifically harmful because it makes any negative strategy able to be absorbed by the ass rather than actually investing time to discuss what strategies are the best. Means we turn all parts of the class because even there is a link. That means the team will ignore the thesis, ignore the thesis. Now, second is that they say perm do uncompromising imperative analysis. It doesn't make sense in the context of the all because they seek to redeem the world in the face of anti-blackness. We seem to move forward to the end of civil society. You want me to read the Wilson card real quick? Sure. Yeah, I'll read the faith in discourse acts as emancipation presumes access to subjectivity that the black cannot. Wilson 10. culture studies and system of grammar, essentially, in which we assume that we all position essentially by the way of symbolic order, in which the potential stations for change overdetermine the universal ability and inability to seize the ways of description within their ideas of corrupt and essentially empowered with a more radical line of political because they are speeches in the face of truth, violence, theoretical, evasion, symbolic and the deliberative ensemble questions regarding political change, radical, practical, and the notion that everyone can be emancipated in some sort of form of discursive and symbolic invention, but emancipation to some form of discursive and symbolic intervention is one defensive subject and place not as a subject petition that accumulated to the positive resonance for the alien subject only operable to the ones of the world. So his or her cultural production was meaning mistakes with that when it can be transposed one cultural suggestion stuff in the symbolic intervention onto godly worldly good and common style. I'm calling for a different conceptual frame of the predicament of the subject of the cultural performance the subject effect of the cultural performance more the social political ontology and the framing that allows us to substitute cultural products and the politics of culture. This has profound implications for the studies of real life because they currently entangle the multiple paradigm and the great interest of an insufficiently critical comparative analysis and complementary analysis pursued in coalitional politics, which means that very nature cries out the four clauses of slave grammar suffering. Now, there's a couple conceded arguments from the Southern Wood 14 card. First is that they make the unintelligible intelligible. They give language people and they give language people and the people latch onto this because they increase the empathy because people who don't understand or don't or will use or commodify black disabled bodies to say like we get it. Oh, we get this. They claim that
in order to create a relationality, right? Which is the ways in which she talks about the people with disabilities being able to relate to non-black people with disabilities as a uniting force while ignoring that criminality makes that relationality impossible.
Second is that hip-hop pedagogy can never break away from system capitalism because it requires accumulation to spread the message, which means that it feeds into the systems instead of actually changing it. The ballot requires you to describe new meaning, but they haven't done that. So they haven't done that. They haven't actually ascribed new meaning to what it means hip-hop pedagogy. If anything, their one AC just gets commodified because within a capitalist society, hip-hop is seen as a multicultural diversifying tool that can be used to spread messages or be used as a commodification tool to understand position and criminalize blackness.
904. Starting from 7.
Up, Pro.
320. I'm gonna go back.
No, 5. I walked into Wake's debate today and they were just yelling out goes down in the DM, and now I just have Snapchat me that goes stuck in my head over and over again. It's actually inescapable. It's really killing me right now.
Also, you're playing down in DM. Initials are DM.
Oh.
Maybe that's
Yeah, that's funny. What the fuck? Why isn't ours anything good?
I can't think of anything else.
DR needs some PR.
I walked into Baylor and Rutgers C doesn't do shit.
I can't
That
imagine.
shit is wild.
Well, yeah, because like that. This isn't sound right now, right?
Oh, they were
Oh, it is.
Okay.
Here.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's the case and then the critique. Everybody ready? Everybody good?
Mm-hmm.
Alright. Everybody good?
The affirmative is a future practice of forcing the conversation of black disability into these spaces now. None of their arguments talk about black disabled people, i.e. how is survival imminent when you literally want to kill yourself because people continually tell you that you're socially dead. People continually tell you that you're parasitic now. Psychological violence should frame around, especially in the context of the unapologetic use of ableist rhetoric within this space that we said is violent to us and others. It's not a punishment, but literally you should not allow this to continue. This is the only impact we can seek to resolve in these spaces, i.e. people will inevitably change their rhetoric if we are here, which is why the affirmative is key to resolving the psychological violence that happens within these spaces now. The parasitic argument specifically is another rhetoric link that turns any chances that they have of solving the communities because it proves that they link to our steward evidence. Parasitic is a word that is used to depict black disabled people as a drain on society. They are the quote-unquote welfare queens that are always talked about within the media. This turns their welfare queens argument because that is the exact kind of language used against black women to criminalize them for being unproductive constructive, which means that your reproduction of that sort of language within this space is what creates that sort of psychological violence onto the people who are quote unquote drains on the system now. This is a diss out to the alternative, and a reason why black disabled thought is necessary on a material level, because they can't understand ability privilege within black communities and the way that black disabled bodies have no social image, i.e. the way in which black scholars are able to be excommunicated from scholarly communities because they're in a wheelchair. I.e. people like Johnny Lacey are able to be excommunicated from the university by other black individuals, which is the intercommunal violence argument that we're going for now. To the critique proper, they say that we stop them from holding black men accountable. We say that there is no reason to make the act perfect because it was already perfect. But I'm a prisoner to poetry and pain, so we will resolve so that we can't actually resolve the ontological structures of blackness, which puts them in a double bind. I.e., these either these structures don't actually get any worse, or the fact that they call us to resolve those structures is that sort of perfectionism of the 1AC, which is the call to order that Halberstam is critiquing now. Now that's a part of now this is not the same as the ethicality of actions, which is why we say things like you should not be able to say colorblind as a metaphor, or you should not be able to call people parasitic, or because that's what happens to actual bodies, or be able to tell people to be unflinching and not apologize for it. You know that this creates psychological violence because we've literally had this debate before when you said handicapism and then you said this is not problematic, and we said that creates psychological violence, and then you continue to create this sort of ableist rhetoric within these spaces. This is the intercommunal violence that we're talking about now. They have no analysis of how this sort of ontological anti-blackness happens within these spaces, but we're literally showing you examples of how the intercommunal violence happens, which doesn't understand, which the analysis of anti-blackness doesn't understand. I.e., if people are able to read things like Wilderson and able to say that anti-blackness structures violence and then create that sort of intercommunal violence, it proves that the alternative would never actually resolve that. Now, into their presumption arguments, their argument assumes that we're trying to resolve climate change. They flagged institutional policy multiple times, but it's a question of our orientation towards the spaces. I.e., what does debate look like? Debate looks like a place where we don't have to say rhetoric and we don't have to read rhetoric critiques in debates because people actually stop doing it, or at least apologize for it. Now, presumption flips affirmative because they have no alternative to anti-blackness and no reason why, no reason that we create more anti-blackness independently. How can you create more ontological violence? This is a double bind. Now, there's a black disability decided on the alternative. They can actually describe this unique violence that happens, which is our Stewart evidence, which goes conceded by the entirety of the negative block. It's literally one of the most important pieces of offenses that we have on your alternative. This means that you can't actually resolve body criminalization. They even admit that there's a different positionality for us, and they say that the black body is always criminalized, but they do not understand the intercommunal violence that happens, i.e. when black people criminalize other black people for being disabled, parasitic, or being unflinching, or flinching within these spaces. Now, we say that they are a creation of, we say that there's a perfectionism, i.e. they're the creation of the black supercrip. When I say I've been studying the same line for days, I'm trying to make it perfect, hope you see the purpose, but my mind is perfect. I'm a prisoner of poetry and pain. I'm talking about the psychological violence that happens when people continuously call for me to do the work on the same line over and over and make sure that I'm behaving perfectly. This is what their theory of power calls for the act to be, the perfect description of how violence operates when there are literally no lines that can describe that subject position. Now,
they allow them to say no to you.
They are a weaponization of that false choice, which is the Halberstam evidence. You should vote after to say no, to not say no to black disabled thought within these spaces. They have not made a reason why competition in the context of our affirmative is good for black disabled people. They've only said that this is a debate. It's a question of competition, but they have created this sort of false choice between the noise of the 1AC and the knowledge that they claim is produced, which from the 1AC, which is our Halberstam evidence that you do not answer, which means also you do not get links to your hip-hop articulations because we are not that hip-hop pedagogy, but rather we are the knowledge, the noise within these spaces that refuses to be turned into music, i.e. we should not be held responsible for the way in which multiculturalism uses hip-hop, but rather the fugitive practices that we create within these spaces, i.e. also our impacts probably outweigh, because in a world where you're not entering the psychological violence impact, it means that your alternative doesn't actually resolve the affirmative, and also you create that sort of psychological violence within these grounds, which means that your alternative is bad for
black disabled people. Now,
Enter severance and
now they say that they say you could go into the permutation here. I don't even think we need to win a permutation when we're in an impact turn to the alt. But in the world where we're going for the permutation, there's probably no risk of severance, especially in a world where their only link is to the way in which we have engaged in hip hop as a practice, which calls on liberal institutions. But we are not that call for liberal inclusivity, but rather the ability to understand the violence that happens to black disabled people, not as an identity category, but literal violence.
I got 36.
536, yeah.
You should go negative a presumption even if hip-hop performative leads to good things. Disabled participation, climate change movements, structurally type like means those movements are due to fail. First is police crackdowns movements and protests organized around hip-hop inevitably get crushed by the police and violence. Inevitably, white supremacist tropes of hip-hop as criminal or disorderly will be used to justify impersonating shooting black people. If the faith in civil society lasts for social movements and lectures and greater numbers of black disabled bodies get exposed to state repression. Next, B is conservative control. Even if social movements avoid police violence will be ignored by existing institutions. Trump's purging and climate change from EPA website and its ties to the coal lobby. Conservative control of the White House and Senate, the power and the use of fossil fuel corporations around the world prove that anti-black and anti-environmental actors and discourse to control the sources of power within civil society means the movement is doomed to fail to begin with. And C, media distortion, mainstream media coverage of the movement of Black Lives proves that even when they mobilize black and disabled persons will be depicted as violent, chaotic, and threatening. Inevitably, Fox News CNN will use the movement to create white panic and drive up the ratings. At best, our movement will garner public support. At worst, to assure Black Lives. And D is a circumvention argument. Even if their movement gains some sort of institutional access to Polito evidence says it's only 0.3% of climate justice movements and lawsuits. Even broad sweeping institutional reforms won't get a because of climate justice and advocates will fail to rulings. That's a free time argument, which is the reason why their app didn't specify what the affirmative does or what exactly it attempts to solve. The 1AC mediates through different solvency mechanisms throughout the debate. First, the 1AC cross-sects the question of including people with disabilities within current climate conversations, particularly situated in the space of debate. The second portion of the affirmative attempts to criticize the 1AC rhetoric and says that then the affirmative is used as a means of mediating rhetorical differences but within the black community. Our argument is that the first level of the circulation of rhetoric, one that assumed that black people with disabilities should be included with current conversations of climate discourse, are already impact turned by the above statements. The second portions are impact turned by the notions of criminality that exist within rhetoric. A perfect example of this is Jason using the trope of the black Superman into a black man not needing to be a superhero, a term coined in Black Studies by Joan Morgan, who is analyzing Black Studies, particularly in hip hop, and talks about things like, it's in When Chickenhead Comes to Roost that she talks about the notion of the black superwoman and how that is used and deployed against black female flesh as always needing to reproduce more labor but never being able to be happy themselves, which shows the ways in which they reproduce that notion of fungibility, right? Because they take upon black women's flesh and make it analogous to other bodies. Our argument isn't that you need to be perfect. Our argument is that perfection is shaped and only made possible through disarticulating black female subjectivity. I hope that makes sense to everyone, but like even the fact that they use that terminology and extend it to black men shows the ways in which they reproduce upon black women's labor and take that away in order to say that we can't be perfect. Our argument is not that you should be perfect, but that there are literal things, like bad things, right? That argument makes sense if I was like, majority of the AF is good, but blank. Our argument isn't majority of the AF is good, but they could have done better, but that we've won offense, that the AF is in fact bad, that they do things that are bad, and that their methodology is bad, which is a reason why you vote negative, either on presumption because we have linear either on presumption or because we have linear dissets to the AF that the alternative resolves. The alternative resolves then because it refuses to put investment or faith within existing structures or mediate blackness in terms of discursive movements. For example, they have not given a reason why any of the terms that we've used outside of parasitic or bad after the 2AC response to each and every criticism that they have levied against us, right? It shows the desire to criminalize blackness or to not have a conversation because we end up having conversations within cultural studies, such as the term of parasitic, while ignoring that like actually the term stems from biology and the ways in which a certain organism can exist off of another organism without providing to it, which is what they've said, the black superwoman quote, right? Which is our argument about the desire for black women to be reproductive in spaces. The desire to force them to produce was already our offense, and their explanation of it doesn't have to do with disability studies, but rather has to do with black women as needing to be productive sources for white civil society, which shows about the ways in which disability is animated upon black female flesh, which is the reason why we need the starting point of unconsensual relationships, which should be proven when he says like you should refuse to say no to the AF. That whole notion of refusal is occupied by a certain relationship to consent in the first place, which is that discursively saying no or discursively providing Jason with a ballot mediates some level or repudiates some form of self-harm or self-love. They've conceded that, one, you criminalized us and I changed the rhetoric, right, changed the term uncompromising in order for us to have a conversation, because you said that it creates psychological violence. Henceforth, I would remove said thing, regardless of if it was capital T true or not, that it was harmful to you. I would remove it because because that stops the ability to have productive conversation. You got mad that I changed the word and were like, see, it proves what we've done for the debate community because we've policed your rhetoric. That proves our argument about the ways in which black women are always seen as hyper empathetic, right? As always needing to move and being manipulated in order to produce a conversation, but then criminalized for doing it and said, like, see, it shows that we're right. No, our argument is that we wanted to have a conversation about the ways in which black female flesh animates certain things such as disabilities, but you refuse to allow for those conversations by focusing on things like parasitic or unflinching. Unflinching meaning unwavering or uncompromising, not literally flinching, as in bodily integrity, especially when Spillers assumes that bodily integrity is literally impossible for black people, and Wilderson is coining from Wilderson and Hartman. We have offense. We think that the movement, that the desire for self-love creates a bad form of liberal reformism, which we've already impact turned. They haven't explained why the ballot should be a referendum on Jason's self-love.
It's 327. Super.
I got like 1 minute. got you.
That's fine.
I got you.
I'll send you my really good speech doc too.
I don't even want the doc. I just want the details.
I know, I'm kidding. That was a joke. Yeah, it is easy. Huh? Downstairs.
Where are all the snacks at?
You want one of these real quick?
I'm out of Ruffles, but I'm just saying Anthony to give me some hot chicken Ruffles.
You can have one of these. Or, they were free.
Feeling good?
Mhm.
Well, it's gonna be a case in the cat.
The 1AC was a fugitive practice of forcing spaces for bodies to exist in their own errors, i.e. the way that we are able to force the black disabled narrative into a space where it's constantly erased. They can see a uniqueness question of how survival is the impact. You should vote on how survival is not intimate, i.e. it takes the ability to love yourselves in spaces that constantly erase the black disabled subject and place the black disabled subject as a position of death rather than life. Our presence forces people to change the space and allows the carving out of spaces to heal and resist exclusionary violence. We're also winning the analysis of that takes place in the way that we are able to force people to change the rhetoric. Even if Q is right that forcing and changing the rhetoric doesn't change the social structures, it makes it less possible for black disabled people to be exposed to it. I.e. if people think they're going to lose because they say the word and they're not going to say it, they ignore the impact of hearing the word and having that language used against you has on people. I.e. that's what is bad, because when black disabled people get called parasitic, when I get told I shouldn't flinch, when I have spasms, I have them mostly because of abuse, when I'm told not to be colorblind, when I'm actually fucking colorblind. This is the kind of violence that shows that our bodies don't matter within these spaces. Now we're also winning our analysis of blackness and disability is key to resolving intercommunal violence. That's an impact that they have contested in creation of communities. Our steward evidence is really good on this. Black disabled people have no social image, no ability to exist within spaces. Being black disabled, they have not contested this, which impacts all of our rhetoric arguments, because when they just say, oh, these are just medical terms, they ignore the way that those terms are then implicated upon black disabled, like that parasitic argument about how that's specifically used is to replicate people as drains on the system, specifically black disabled bodies who are always deemed as not productive. And also you can vote F to refuse to say no. It's a key framing question. They have given you the academic power of refusal. Voting against black disabled performance is the perfectionism that we're critiquing. They have deputized you with the ability to determine Jason's worth within this space. Ballot is not referendum on Jason's self-love, but rather the refusal to make that decision. The abdication of the academic ability that you've been given here, which is a unique reason that you can vote affirmative, even if they win any of their offense. Now, first argument they make is this black the first argument they make is this black super argument. No, we're not a conflation, not saying that violence experienced in the same way, i.e. we are taking it differently because it's a different form of violence. They haven't proved the link that they are forcing Jason to have no faith in the system and putting that on his back and forcing him to engage in that. Also, if the argument is bad for black women, it also is probably bad for black men in the context of how we're articulating it. The way that they say that you have the alternative is to put no faith in the system, but they ignore how putting faith in the system is sometimes the only way that certain people can get out of bed in the morning, the only way that certain people cannot kill themselves, which is the reason why the survival strategy framing of the affirmative is key to understand the engagement. That's a victim blaming argument we've been making. The way that they then criminalize people who have to put faith in those systems to survive. They have no alternative for that. They have not given a reason how they resolve psychological violence, i.e. what do they do about things about critical depression. They also say that we are criminalizing black women. No, it's not a punishment. Jason does this framing very good, but their rhetoric is violent. It's a question of accountability. If you don't vote against them and don't tell people that this rhetoric is wrong, that is just what allows you to continue, which means that you take that positionality to change it. They make this hip-hop argument, but I think Apple's wrong evidence answer cultures is how they turn the noise into music, and that is what the voting of negative does, because they only understand Nixon's performance within the theory of anti-blackness, within the theory of hip-hop, but never in the ephemeral way that it took place in this performance. A key impact from here is the question of the way the kind of violence has happened within this space. The reason why you vote that they fracture black communities because of the kind of intercommunal violence that they commit when they continue to use ableist rhetoric and say, oh, that's okay, it's a medicalized term, outweighs all of their offense. Look, they make a bunch of these environmental justice links. Even if you hold us to part of our app that's about, we're clearly going for resolving psychological violence, but even if you hold us to part of the app that's like social imaging, our argument is the reason all of that co-option happens, the reason all of that abandonment happens is because in the status quo, but disabled bodies have no value. Our argument is that we break down that idea by affirming black disabled body as already perfect, which changes that mindset shift. All of their arguments assume a world in which there's the view that black disabled bodies are pathological and death. Our argument is we need to change that script. They have made no claim as to why individuals can't change that mindset, i.e. if we're able to change the way people who speak within these rounds are able to change the way people think in these rounds, it's a reason why. Yeah, which is a reason why that they can't solve. Also, we have plenty of dissensity alternative about the way that they reconcile psychological violence, and they have no spillover claim of how their alternative does anything to actually break down that system of politics that they're criticizing, which means that's the ontological violence claim that goes conceded in the 1AR. That if we can't make ontological violence any worse because it's ontological, that means you vote on the psychological framing. At the very worst, the permutation results, because even if we're wrong on the psychological, on the ontological framing, we have the only mechanism of resolving psychological violence in black communities within black disability, because black disability studies is important because it resolves that psychological violence that Wilderson doesn't talk about.
Oh, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah. Do you want to do it?
stop during the breaks. Just like start prepping other people.
Yeah.
Because if not, you just get so free.
Oh yeah. If you let yourself loose, your adrenaline
want the card or you want the
There's
card?
cards too? Yeah.
There's just one card. Okay.
Try that? Yeah. Just times in 15 minutes, just so you know. Okay. Thank you so much.
Ren's not giving us dinner, right?
There'll be snacks.
I'm just curious as to how we're gonna make it to decision time for the last debate, 8:30, without like even a dinner-sized break. Like that's just through the 4.5 hours.
That's how the NDT works every year.
I know, and every year I will keep complaining about it. I remember it sucks, but then I experience it and
Harrison charges snacks, so it'll probably be pretty good.
where are the snacks actually?
Probably the same place.
Sweet. I'm so lazy.
There's the snack game message in the restaurant. Super working.
2-1 for the negative.
I said so. I just feel like overall, I have a hard time coming to grips with the position of the negative. In a world where the context of the 1AC is set up to kind of like question the way in which, I guess, the way in which knowledge production happens, it's hard for me to like ignore the questions of, or ignore the use of the word, is it parasitic, parasite, just the language of the 1NC. It's kind of hard for me to ignore that. And so in a world where I have the choice, in a world where he kind of highlights like faith is necessary for shaping some people's reality, some people's perspectives, I have a hard time saying no to that. I'm not like the best flow centric judge, so the overall like context of the negative's position I didn't quite understand towards the end of the debate. And I just feel like for me, Q slowed down a little bit, and it may and set up the 1NR to point out specifically what it is where I'm supposed to be voting against the AF in this position, and I think it might be a different choice. I think that I had a better understanding of the negative's position coming out of the cross X's, and then I just lost that in the 2NR. And so I think inherently I understand the violent claims that they were making out of the 2AR better than the ones that you were making in the 2NR.
I'll ask questions, but after you go.
It don't matter.
Okay. So I think, I guess 3 sort of big AF strategy things that sort of stood out to me as issues. One is this question is sort of whether or not there's a unique violence that Black disabled bodies face as compared to, I guess, Black able-bodied people. So kind of like what Q says in the 2NC, like, yes, I get that obviously a Black disabled person would have a different relationship to the world than a Black person who is not disabled, but I'm not sure why that difference matters in context of how this debate is going down. So like it matters in the sense that like obviously there are bad things that happen as a result, but I think the 2NC is quite good on sort of talking about why sort of the structure of anti-Blackness is what sort of controls all other relationships and other forms of oppression, etc. And so that's why we have to sort of start from that position. And it's weird to me, like the AF, I feel like at all points you either talk about anti-Blackness being bad or you talk about ableism being bad, but at no point do I hear, I think, a very good articulation of the two combined, if that makes sense. And I think that's just sort of an example of why I struggle to sort of understand what this unique violence is that you say that they would not be able to access and ignore and make worse, right? The sort of, and I'm gonna do more specifics, but I kind of do one big picture thing. The second big thing is that in the 1AR especially, I think that you need to give some of their arguments a little more credit because it's hurting your ability to answer them. So there are a lot of points where they're giving examples of things you say in the 1AC, et cetera, to prove some of their link arguments. But y'all, when you're answering some of these link arguments, you talk about the AF in terms of what the goal of the AF is. And do not address, I think, the negative's big argument, which is that, yes, you have this goal, and our point is that you do not get to it, / make it worse, right? But most of the explanation you have, I think, is very much centered around, like, this is sort of the purpose of the AF, and doesn't really get to addressing some of these specific link arguments you're making, right? So there needs to be a point where you're like, okay, so Q says X line of the AF, or whatever, is bad. Here's why either that this doesn't make sense in context of the whole AF strategy, or why even if it is a little bad, the rest of the AF strategy overwhelms it, or whatever, right? But you can't just like generically be like, no, we're not multiculturalism, for example, right? Especially because, or we can't be blamed for multiculturalism. Especially because like, I think this is another good example where you're not giving their arguments enough credit. Maybe I don't think it's like multiculturalism co-ops you F. I think it's their argument is a little stronger and that you use similar logic, like you use Does that make sense? Which I think is a little different and so needs to be answered.
I guess my issue is like I just wasn't ever sure when there was like an application of that to like I get like the multiculturalism aspect of the argument. I think they're doing it well, but like an application of how that relates to like blackness and disability. Because like there's one line where like he was like it's not about like you're not specifically talking about blackness, but like I guess I wasn't sure if like that was in the 2NR about like how like it's a question of you're not specifically isolating blackness, therefore you're multiculturalism. At least that's how I was understanding, especially like in cross-ex.
Okay. I'm sorry, repeat that very last thing you just said.
Yeah, it's like it seemed like the link to me in terms of why we were multiculturalism was like that the 1AC doesn't specifically isolate like black bodies. It's more talking about like racism in general and like
I think I understood like the inclusion stuff and cross-ex of the 1AC seemed like part of this to a certain extent as well. I mean the inclusion stuff ended up being a lot of things. But I thought that is another example as well of multiculturalism. At least also like I guess just like my general understanding of multiculturalism, it seemed like the AF sort of saying that, you know, we should now change climate discourse to include sort of discussion of black disabled bodies, right? Where it didn't before, and multiculturalism tends to also do similar things. I guess I mean like so like I think there are ways you can definitely cut back on that sort of analogy. I just don't think it really happens in this debate. But I guess my bigger point, really more than this like the specific multiculturalism debate, is that in general, you need to address some of the specific parts of the act that they are critiquing, instead of so generically at points being like, but we don't. Like, our point is to not do that, right? Because it just sort of begs the question of, like, I understand that's still your goal, but I still am confused as to how you do that. So the next kind of thing, sorry, I gotta scroll a little. I think also that you need the 2AR kind of like basically entirely blows off all of Q's arguments about why you criminalize black women, sort of that the entire analogy that you use about the superhero. I can't remember the exact phrase. I'm sorry, I don't know much about this literature, but it does seem like there's an entire argument about why you sort of steal black women's labor and sort of also demand that same perfection that you say they demanded you. And I don't think any of this is addressed really in the 2AR.
I guess like where I felt like I answered that argument was like where I said that like it's not a conflation because like we're recognizing impressionism, but also like if their argument is that like that's what black women experience, like that production putting on them. I guess my argument was it's not clear why black men don't also experience that in some way.
But my understanding was that there's some specific language that you use that.
It was like the black superwoman as opposed to like the
there's a problem with that is that this is an argument that they're making this argument in relationship to the ways in which they get the ability to check back the ways in which black men produce discourse. Your argument to that is don't black men suffer too? But their argument is particularly is that like when you engage or you produce this focus of like the black disabled male, it allows us to forget categorizations of like the black disabled woman. And your answer to that is, but black men also suffer. And their argument is, yes, that's true.
Okay.
But I'm not sure why you get leverage on that. Do you understand that?
Yeah. I guess I'm just wondering like why that's like offense in a world where like, cause like I guess what I'm not sure their wing is like a link where we're perfection, not like telling them to be perfect. Other, I guess maybe.
I don't think it's okay. Well, I'll let you.
Sorry.
Oh no, you're totally fine. So I think that I don't think that they win a great link, except that it's almost like I don't think you win a good link, and they sort of prove it vis-a-vis making sort of also not the greatest link arguments for why you demand the same sort of perfection. So I guess.
Do you think not the rhetoric portions are like that's where I'm trying to say like there's a difference between a rhetorical distinction of something like for example me policing my language in order to make this space more accessible. Right? Even if I don't capital T true think the word is fucked up, I'll change it in order to accommodate you, which is hyper-empathy, which is my point about no, you're putting super like that's about being okay, but
I agree, perfect. And that's kind of a part of my decision. But.
Okay. Yeah, this is kind of be my next thing. That it just seemed very contradictory. Well, I guess Q just explained it really much better than I would have said. But yeah, I do think that every time you make an argument about why there's sort of a demand for perfection, also sort of begs the question, and I wish Q you would maybe spend a little more time on this, of just sort of, I guess, what, in a world in which the AF is a discussion of an individual sort of survival strategy, what is your role in that sort of discussion, right? And because it seems like they sort of preclude your ability to have any sort of real role, because it seems like most of the ways you would approach that discussion would be a demand for perfection as per what their explanation is. And so don't you like sort of make this argument, but I think you need to make it a little more offensive. So not just like, well, we don't demand for perfection. We actually have a lot of reasons why the AF is bad, but also just like the idea that we should not be able to sort of come to the best sort of conclusion possible on this issue, given some of our impact arguments, is just as messed up. Especially given like some of their own sort of rhetoric and arguments about why, you know, instances of psychological violence, etc. matter. I'm not saying like this is the psychological violence impact, but like that sort of those sort of linear impacts, etc. do matter, right? As per their own, I think, impact explanation in a lot of places, and so I think you should utilize that more to your advantage. I think the two-era, there are a lot of places where if you need to, I think about whether or not you have an impact to some of the arguments you're making. So a good example of this is you say that they only explain the AF in terms of blackness and hip-hop. And I guess there's an implied impact to that, but they have made arguments for why it's actually important to sort of start from the question of anti-blackness, right? And so it sort of still begs the question when you make the argument that they have only explained it through that, why that's necessarily a bad thing. Does that make sense? Like, that doesn't really contest the part of the debate that I think that they are, or the part of your argument that they're focusing on.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess like the impact is trying to go forward is kind of like this Havelstrom, like when they understand this only as hip hop and that kind of, that is the legitimization, that is the turning like the noise into music argument that I feel like we're going for.
So yeah, I get that. I think that that sort of ignores some of the ways that they're explaining like the hip hop stuff, for example, which is that they explain why exactly there will be some sort of co-option and why. I mean, I use co-option in very sort of reductionist sense here, but also why that would sort of affect the AF's impacts. And so I don't think you can just get away with being like they can't just reduce the entire AF to hip hop, given that they've explained why the hip hop components of the AF affect the other parts, right? I don't think it's just a reduction. Like, they have made arguments for why that link sort of.
But I guess like what my argument was is their ability to understand it as hip hop. Like I'm kind of contesting this, I guess, on the link level, which I think has an impact. Like their ability to understand it as hip hop in the first place was kind of my argument about like the way the Havelstrom evidence about like the way they turn the noise into music. So I agree with you like that they have like a conversation about why like hip hop is bad, but I guess it's more of like the link part.
I guess I think they're more than just a little bit hip hop bad. Or I guess, I mean, if you were trying to make the argument that it's the idea that they think of us as hip hop at all is bad.
Like they understand or answer us in the context of like this is hip hop, this is how we understand hip hop. I guess is like.
But I mean, they have made like arguments for why this is like an understanding that makes sense in the sense that they've made like a causal link chain, like you use hip hop, it gets co-opted in the next way, etc. So why is that a bad understanding?
Yeah, I guess it's the first part, right? I just don't know where they're like, where they ever even are kind of just like give a reason why the 1AC was hip hop. I guess is like.
I'm gonna be honest. I don't think that's an argument that they win substantially. Furthermore, I don't think that they tease out the impact to it. I do see where it could connect. I think that you don't answer this Wilson argument about the particular performances that you engage in. And I think that that's a unique reason why like their verification of your shit as hip hop proves that like because of the performative element of it, right? That it one is a contingent way to deal with anti-blackness, and two doesn't really resolve the fact that like there is not a grammar to produce and you attempt to produce that grammar, which is her argument about you trying to reach perfection.
So that's how kind of you get to the co-option, right? Is that like their ability
Yes.
to script us as hip hop.
Yes, I don't think the work was done to solidify that as like a term, but I think that is how I would look at it.
That does make a lot of sense to me, actually. Okay.
Can I go now?
Yeah.
All right, cool. 4 arguments I look at in order to like determine how this debate round comes down to. One is a question of whether it's a question of contingency versus like gratuitous forms of violence. I think that at the end of it, right, I think that Jason is doing a lot of hedge back of like why the unique position of the affirmative is one that allows us to deal with the ways which gratuitous violence happens to us, i.e. the ability for one to heal himself. Then the argument here is that you then transition this argument in the 2AR to be psychic violence. Right? The issue with that it's exactly what Q has set up already, is that like you resolve contingent forms of violence that happens to black disabled bodies, happen to black bodies, happen to regardless of what the situation is, that you deal with the contingencies of those forms of violence instead of gratuitous nature, which I think Jason is doing a real good job of like controlling that kind of language, that like the performance in itself, i.e. the ability to make music or to make noise to music, is that ability for us not necessarily to produce a grammar, but to produce a citing out against, I guess, gratuitous forms of violence, right? Which I think is a better interpretation than given the 2AR, where you're like, we need to solve for psychic violence. They say these violences are happening, but we're going to solve for this violence. This is exactly the problems that I think that they're really smart, and they go for this reciprocal of like this kind of reciprocality argument, which is another point I think too, is that the argument that they're making with this perfection argument, with this kind of like debunking of like the separation of disability and blackness argument, right? These are all kind of like connotation to the idea that like you're trying to reform society, you're trying to like be more inclusive of how we can participate in in that functionality, i.e. you want to produce a grammar to speak to the topic instead of producing a grammar that speaks against it completely, right? I think that because this is true, right? One, I don't think you resolve psychic violence because you don't stop the conditions that make psychic violence possible in the first place, which is those contingent forms. Second part to this is that like you never address gratuitous violence given a 2AR. Like, given a 2AR, I don't know how we begin to deal with the ways in which anti-blackness is very insidious in its nature and gratuitous in its form. Right? Third argument I look to is this starting point argument, which I think that it's developed a lot in the 2NC. 1AR says spends maybe 10 seconds on it. It's we should start from the Black Matrix argument, right? I think that's also where a lot of the cross-sex debate happens. That like it becomes cherry picking between disability, black womanhood, blackness. It becomes these 3 kind of areas in which everybody's trying to cherry pick. Like, well, you're bad for disabled people. Well, you're bad for women. Well, you're bad for black people. It's like, at that point, no one is actually resolving how we deal with it. I think that the ways in which Q kind of packages as a sequencing question means that we have to focus on the matrix. It makes it a lot harder for me to give you justification, particularly when the language you use in the 2AR and in the 1AR to some extent is that we need to focus on the black disabled male. Right? Is that as much as that's true, you should defend that as a starting point and give me some significant reasons. I think that Q does a lot of work of explaining why her starting point is unique for how we should address it. Second thing is I think that, and this could have been done a lot more effectively in the 1AR, I think that Kendu makes a really good turn on the permutation debate, which is more so is I think one, you could use the coalitions argument to also kind of infuse that, is that like there's always a moment of like we need to coalesce to solve the problem, when our argument is more so a focus of how we engage in this actual paradigmic kind of like analysis. And I think that this is also the issue too, is that you're never doing any work of explaining to me what the disad to the actual alternative is, or furthermore how the permutation functions, given that the alternative calls for this thing. I think your arguments about vagueness are wrong. Not vagueness, about severance are wrong, and I can't give you any leverage for it, right? But I do think that you win this kind of like disad on the permutation, which is more so that disad is along of the lines of that kind of like conflating what it means to be black, or conflating what it means to kind of operate through anti-blackness. I think that the argument that is being made, particularly in the 1AR, is that like we cannot resolve this until we kind of have this analysis. Your response to this is unflinching. The word unflinching is used. You never really actually address the alternative. You're just like that. Wilson used the word unflinching. That's bad. It doesn't happen in this debate, which may prove solvency for the AF, but then you also have to prove why the AF doesn't have all these other disads.
I guess like one piece of arguments I've been on that I think we're going for is this idea of like kind of what Sean was talking about like some people like in order to have kind of stuff, in order to like survive, need that kind of investment into hope in order just to like.
I agree. My thing is just that one is defensive, and two is that like if this is true and not like I'm not one of those people who are like, yes, we don't need to focus on like life and hope and stuff like that. You need to explain to me why I should prioritize this particular engagement with social life versus the particular engagement with social death. Right? I think Q says that we should examine and focus on social death and how social death makes it impossible for us to live. And then your argument is that, but we need to live.
That makes sense. I guess like the one area where I thought was offensive was just like the idea of the way that the alternative kind of posits that like wavering or whatever term you want to use of the way that like when people love themselves like that and like invest in those things effectively to survive, like that is the waiver, and that is like kind of like how I was trying to articulate the perfection dissent in terms of like we like black civil bodies are then forced to like abdicate those forms of
Wait, say that again?
Like that's how I was trying to articulate the perfection dissent.
No, before that, when you was talking about the black body.
Oh, like the way like the black body is like supposed to like abdicate those possibilities of like self-love because like that is like ethically or like ontologically.
This is the labor argument that you say that Q doesn't have any credence on, right? So the argument here, right, is that like as much as you say people need to love themselves, right, the argument then I would pose, and I think is also posed the entire debate round, is what prevents that love from being possible. Right? I think that this is where the link debate actually is couched in, is that like your attempts at loving yourself produces all these hodgepodge of other problems because we're not dealing with the structure that conditions your body to not be loved in the first place.
Okay. So basically like kind of it's like even if that like self-love occurs in an individual instance, the structure that makes self-hatred exist is still in.
Yes. I think the argument you need to make, right, is kind of we need to kind of like over-identify or explode these spaces with these kind of performances, right? So kind of going for this noise argument, but weaponizing it a little bit more. Because like, I get that like the performance itself is using noise in order to produce something concrete. But I think that's also the argument that they're making, that performance in itself is one that attempts to produce a grammar that would, we believe, deal with the forms of violence that are produced against black disabled bodies.
So should we maybe go for like we destroy the grammar that makes human?
Yes, incoherency. I don't like. That's why I'm not sure. Like you've done this before, and I expected that to be the 1 yard shift, was to just be like these bars meant basically the destruction and not the creation.
Yeah.
Right. I think that you get tagged as the affirmative trying to produce and create something, which is the inclusion stuff and all of that, instead of what it could potentially be, which is that its destructive potential is the inability, or it's the inability, or the inability to have the ability to produce against the grain.
Yeah.
Right? So it's the fact that like because of the position of being both disabled and black, right, that we're not seen as being either coherent or being apart, i.e. we are both adjective and also seen as like bad for civil society or bad for society and modernity. So the issue here is that any production that we do in here is one, never considered production, and two, probably actually works against the system. I.e. coherency, which is where I thought this Afrofuturism debate was going on, but you was just like, here's another thing the AF does, and it was like, yeah, here's another link that Q got.
Shawnee, how could I change? I guess I'm curious because I know none of their cards say parasite, and so the explanation that they give of it is just that like black women are couched as not being productive, and that is what established notions like the welfare queen, because like that was the link I gave to like their use of medication, was that like the circulation of the welfare queen then becomes possible through focusing on purely material things, right? Like yes, we do need to survive, and so people make survival strategies, but the implications for that survival are far spreading and libidinal, right, which is like calling people welfare queen, etc. And so when they said, yeah, that's because black women are seen as non-productive, what I was intending to mean by that is, yeah, that's our point. Black women are seen as non-productive. That's the libidinal energy, right? Like that is parasitic. It's living off of the host, but then blaming it for all of your problems, which is like a biological, like it's like a term in biology, like an organ. It's just like when a living host lives on an organism, but like it takes away from it, but doesn't like contribute, you know, like it's actively negative to said thing. So like, I guess if the like grammar of parasite can only be understood through the rhetoric of someone like black women's labor, I'm curious why that's like a reason to vote for a a disabilities argument and not a reason to vote like on the ways in which black flesh is used productively or non-productively.
You're gonna have to ask that question in another way.
Okay, I don't know what part of Parasite uses ableist discourse.
I feel like the way that the 2AR painted the ability to use a particular language or decide not to use a particular language, for me, I feel like that gave them a little bit more weight. And so I'm gonna have to think about the question that you're asking and be able to give you an answer
I want to avoid the idea that like changing language proves that they've solved something. Because
Classification.
just like, I guess in the future I could just not use the term. It's just like, it doesn't really bother me, but like I always presume, just like as a human being, that if it like bothers someone else and that there's like a synonym for it, that I'll just use it because it's just easier that way.
I think the argument you should be making against this is that like language will fuck us all over.
Say that again?
Language will fuck us all over, right? The ability for us to believe that we have a particular determination or particular control or particular nexus in which that language is used, and we believe that we have ability or control over it, is exactly how we get into producing violence against one another. I.e., I can say a word for me because of black coding means something uniquely different for you. This is kind of an argument that like rappers go for, right? So you say crip means something to niggas that is different from like people who are actually dealing with disability and stuff like that, right? So that kind of like black code that is being produced, which is the welfare queen too, right? The welfare queen becomes a tropes in which language is then used against us, and we don't have control. We can't reconfigure the meaning of that word. As much as we try, we still don't have control. So you can interpret a word 3 different ways, and to blame us for the second of the 3 is exactly how language then becomes weaponized against us.
Yeah, and I guess like, I don't know, I didn't want to dive too much in this argument, maybe that was my bad, but it's just like there are metaphors that we understand through like, you know, our senses that like just literally cannot be divorced from language. Like obviously like sight in certain ways is just like, it's not like, it's just like that is how people understand the world. It's literally how ontology works, is like people situate themselves through certain sensory discourses. So like, you know, albeit it would be fucked up to be like, you know, I can't really think of, you know what I mean, I don't know, I'm trying to think of it, but like if I had intended flinching as in saying like just stand still, then that would probably, or stand your ground as in meaning literally stand up, those 2 things like would be obviously ableist and bad. But there are certain ways to understand language in which you're saying something like, you know, an unflinching analysis, meaning to be unwavering, or parasitic, meaning literally the way that civil society feeds off of black women and then criminalizes them for it. That those things are the ways that we come to understand the world that like we shouldn't have to apologize for. Like that is accurately a description of what happens. Do you think that would have been more convincing for you? Because it's just like, I don't understand why it should be criminalized for language when they haven't even explained why that language is bad. They've said that parasitic means that black women are seen as non-productive. And I'm saying, yes, black women are seen as non-productive.
Yeah, I will say I didn't really get the parasitic link at all. Like some of the other links you had to some of the other words, I thought like at least, okay, although I think there need to be a lot more explanation. But the parasitic thing, I just don't. I mean, like they agree entirely. At what point do they use it in a way that is negative and says otherwise? I guess is my question.
That's a really good
I'm gonna be 100% honest. I think that y'all went for like the tricks instead of going for the F.
Yeah.
And it ain't gonna help you against somebody who knows how to go for her K.
And it kind of honestly, I think sort of for me creates some cognitive dissonance with all of your like perfection arguments, because the demand for perfection, it seems like you have way more when most of your offense is based on like specific words they've said and not the actual arguments being made per se, whereas they actually have arguments about your arguments and not just.
And furthermore, you're cherry picking of their language.